Yeah, so I've served for 12 years, and I guess the reason I didn't run is people started to approach me and talk to me as if I was a politician. And I never really went into politics to be a politician. I'm a builder. I'm Dirck Bartlett. I have a whole life outside of politics, and I did politics for fun. I majored in politics in college. I studied abroad in England, and I did a bunch of stuff in Parliament and learned all about how politics works and really enjoyed it. And then I went into the building and construction business after college and never really did anything with my degree. So I went into politics 12 years ago as a hobby almost, just interested in different issues that were going on at the time, mostly land use and environment issues. And back then it was all commercial developments, big box stores. It was, the moratorium on big box stores and things like that were the big issues. And we went to a bunch of public hearings, and you say what you want to say, and you organize all these people to speak, and then the decision comes down and you say, there's got to be a better way. So you say, I'm going to go sit in one of those chairs. But then as time went on, and I have to say, I enjoyed serving the citizens of Talbot County, and it's so rewarding. I recommend it to anybody. But when people, eventually it gets to the point where people start looking at you like you are all you are is a politician, and you get into arguments with people about silly things, and you just sort of look at it and say, all right, I've done this for 12 years. Do I really want to do this again?
Yeah. Well,
I had a very strange attitude about growth and development. Most people would look at the Waterside Village, for example, and see economic development, where they went outside the bypass and we built this big commercial center in the town of Easton for Target and all the other stuff that's over there. At the time when all of those annexations were happening back then, I was looking at it like, oh my God, we're losing this beautiful farm to this big box development. This is crazy. We tried to stop the annexation. We were working very hard. And we couldn't stop it, but in the end we did get some land permanently preserved as part of that whole deal. And it ended up being, they did a pretty good job ecologically. You can see they preserved a lot of the marshes and things over there. And so it was a lot better than most developments. And so we got some significant concessions on it, but we couldn't stop it. And so it's just symptomatic. Back then, when the economy was hot and things were booming, there were huge tracts of land under threat. And we were doing everything we could to try to keep the town viable, keep the town of Easton mostly viable, to direct the growth into the towns, redeveloping existing shopping centers if we could. Lowe's is sort of an example of that, where we, instead of having them go out to the airport where they wanted to go, we forced them into the town. And they got their new store, but it wasn't out by the entrance to the town of Easton, out by the airport, which would have been a disaster. So we did some really good things. But it was a different time. The economy was humming. People were less concerned about their jobs and more concerned about their environment.
Right.
And then everything fell off the cliff in 08, 09, 2010, and people were more worried about their jobs, frankly. And the environment became less of a concern. So it's gone through cycles over the years. I've been on 3 councils, some of which have been very difficult in terms of growth and development issues, but we've worked our way around things. Some of the councils were always switching. You might be allied with this person one day and this person the next day, and that seemed to be okay too. We did some good things. In politics, what I found is you can't do everything you want to do, but you can still do some really good things along the way that maybe you don't even are surprises to you, but in just the concordance of events and how they work together, you get some really good results sometimes, and you don't expect that going in. So working with different people a lot of times and talking with different council people and working out different arrangements, you got good results. This particular council has been very different than that, and that has been frustrating. It's been Jennifer, Cory, and Chuck voting together most of the time on most major issues. And the frustration for me, and I think Laura Price as well, has been that we see icebergs on the horizon. We try to avoid them by working in input from the public, and it's ignored, and we crash right into the iceberg. People get very upset. The room gets full of angry people. And part of my frustration was I was getting blamed for things that were totally avoidable, and I knew were going to be problems. I didn't vote a certain way, and yet I got tagged with it, and that was really frustrating for me. And just a sort of a quick review, we had the Next Step 190, we had the comprehensive plan, we had the noise ordinance, we had and short-term rentals were a big piece of that. But basically, the way I look at it in total is you have sort of business interests on one side and the interests of the general population on the other. That's how most of these things broke down. You look at the noise ordinance, for example. We've always had a 55 decibel noise ordinance. It's been there for I don't know how many years, 50 years. Seems to me nobody ever called me up and said, this place is too quiet. Could you liven it up around here? Yeah. People in general were happy with the ordinance we had. The rewrite comes along. This council decides we're going to put a little committee together to kind of make recommendations. I said, okay, fine. We decided to put 3 pro-noise people and 3 no-noise people together in a group with the staff to run the thing and manage it and let them do their recommendations. That all seemed fine to me. We put it together. We had interested names of people in the community, and off they went to do their recommendation on the noise. A few weeks later, in an executive committee meeting that we have with all the council people and the staff, my fellow council people decided to add more names to that committee. And they were pro-noise people. And I objected, and I was outvoted, and we added, I think, 2 more names to the committee. And lo and behold, the results of the committee are, in essence, a recommendation to double the noise in the county. At one time, they had a vote that they all agreed that 60 decibels was fine, and then later they voted, I think, 7-5, something like that, to, I can't remember how many people were on the committee at that point, but it was a vote like that to go up to 65. And 65 was crazy. I mean, yeah, you can couch it in whatever terms you want. Well, the state recommends this or that. We'd been living with 55 for 50 years and nobody complained. Why were we increasing it at all? But anyway, the recommendation was 65. And in the end, we had to come up with amendments. And in the end, we got it back down to 60. I wanted to get it back down to 55, but we didn't have the votes. Rather than get into the weeds on decibels and what, I think it's better to look at it in terms of the business interest against the right of the average person to enjoy their property peacefully. That's where the collision occurred down in Tillman mostly, is you had residents who live in the neighborhood and you have business owners who want to increase the number of weddings, increase the number of outdoor music events and things like that create noise. And so you have people on the council like President Williams and Chuck Callahan and Cory Peck who seem to think that 65 was fine, and they are siding with the business interests. And you had Laura Price and I trying to push it back down to 55 because we didn't see the problem to begin with. So that's just the noise issue. Then you have the sewer line, the running of the sewer lines. And I saw your interview with Jennifer Williams that you recently did, where she's responding to all of these kinds of issues. And she says, for example, when you hear it, to me, I was even listening to it saying, oh, this all sounds very reasonable. And then I thought back of how it all went down, and I realized that Jennifer's an attorney, and she is very pro-business, and she couches things in such a way that make it very appealing to the average person listening. But having been in the room, having been there, I'll use an example. We talk about the strip centers. We were going through the Next Step 190, and we're going through section by section with staff. And we get to the part about, do we want to have strip shopping centers on county and state roads? And it's always said, prohibit. And Jennifer says, well, why don't we insert the word discourage instead of prohibit? And what she'll tell you is that, and what she said in the interview was, this was just a work session. We were just, tossing up different ideas. Well, no. We were in the work session. Yes, it was a work session. And we were actually reviewing each section, and we were changing things. This was not a game of Scrabble. We were changing things, and then the staff would incorporate those changes into the final draft. So the term discourage was a way of, you could drive a Mack truck through discourage, right? And we could have lots of strip centers if you made that substitution rather than the word prohibit. And she's a lawyer, she knows this. So you gotta wonder where those kinds of things came from and who was coaching her to try to make those changes. And thank God they didn't make it into the final draft. But that's an example of, she says, well, maybe we could have a little strip center somewhere that might be appropriate. Well, yes, that's true. Maybe it would be. But you could also have 10 of them that aren't appropriate if you change that one word from prohibit to discourage. But what she's saying, in essence, is let's open the door a little bit. And by opening the door a little bit, you open it a lot. If you go from the term prohibit, which is basically no, you can't do this, to discourage, you can drive a truck through that loophole. And if you're a developer, you can make the argument, yes, I know it says discourage, but that doesn't mean you're not allowed to do it. That little change of a phrase means everything. Some of the legislation they were trying to get through had to do with a 3-vote majority on the council being able to put anything anywhere in the county. That bill was defeated, thank God, but that was an effort to basically say, forget the rules and regulations we have and that we've had for the last 50 years. We're going to do a new floating zone that will allow you to plunk down an amusement park in the middle of a cornfield if 3 people on the council think it's a good idea. That was the biggest bullet we dodged in this 4-year period that I remember. Had that gone through, that would have been a total nightmare for a lot of people. Jennifer seems to make the argument that the state of Maryland has all sorts of rules and regulations about who can get into a sewer line and who can't. And basically the reality is the state of Maryland is one of the problems. We wanted to run a sewer line to Bosman and Nevitt to clean up failing septic systems. You've got, in essence, slums being created in these villages because nobody can improve their house because they can't do anything with their lousy septic system. So they can't add bedrooms and bathrooms and things. And so they can't make improvements. They can't sell their house. They've got a real problem. We need to get them sewer lines. But we don't want subdivision for every property between the plant and where we're running the sewer line. We don't want additional growth. We just want to clean up the failing septic systems. So that amendment number 4 was a big deal. And I remember people saying, we've got to get this amendment done, and Laura supported it. She did a good job of putting it together and presenting it. I thought it was a very reasonable protection that we should put in there. And I had people saying, well, where are we going to get the 3rd vote? And I said, well, I don't know. If I were you, I'd work on Cory Peck, because a lot of times Cory has been the reasonable one in the room who has said, he's not really wired into a lot of land use issues. That's not what his background is. He doesn't really care that much about them. But he in times when you really needed that third vote, you could go to Cory and sometimes get him to move. And he did in that case. He voted for it. And once he changed his vote, the other two changed their vote because they knew that it was a 3-2 vote against them at that point. So, but they would never have voted for that Amendment 4 had Cory not changed his vote. And sometimes you can make progress with that group occasionally. I've always been a Republican, and I've never had a very good relationship with the Republican Central Committee, for example. But I've never really needed them because I got a lot of votes in the general election from Democrats who were pro-environment, who liked what I had to say. So I was never uncomfortable about my relationship with the Republican Central Committee. They tolerated me because I had an R next to my name, but that's about all they did, is tolerate me. This particular election has been very different, though. The Republican Central Committee has targeted my good friend Laura Price, and they've come after her in a big way. And if you look at the big picture and you step back and look at these little pieces of the puzzle that the Star Democrat has put together on what's been going on, it's a serious assault on a sitting member of the Republican Party on that council. And it's very concerning. The issue with Matt Albers creating a fictitious Facebook name in the name of Sears Wheeler, and having Republican Central Committee members in that meeting, in those meetings, creating the coalition that, or the Common Sense Talbot PAC that they created. And I had to write down the names of all the people because there's so many of them. But basically they fall into 3 categories. They're either Midshore Board of Realtors, Chamber of Commerce, Republican Central Committee. Either way, they represent the development interests in this county. And they got together and they formed this Common Sense PAC, and they basically targeted Laura Price's candidacy. And for the Republican Central Committee to do that, that's a violation of their oath. I think what's going on is this Common Sense Talbot group, which includes Jennifer Williams, Cory Peck, Chuck Callahan, and Frank DeVillio, they smell blood in the water. The development interests in this county smell blood in the water. They want those 4 elected. And they're working hard to get those 4 elected. Because if you get those 4 on the county council, you can basically go hog wild with growth and development in this county. And you're up against some Democrats who are they're laying low, which they probably should as the Republicans go after each other in this case, but they have some very good candidates who are very sensible with growth and development issues. I would point to Pete Lesher and Naomi Hyman as good examples of people who I think would be great. I don't agree with them on some social issues and some other things which I could probably live with, but on growth and development, they clearly understand the comprehensive plan, they respect the public's input into that plan, and protecting the public's interest in that plan. So I think they would be great on the council. The short-term rental issue has been a big deal for people, private property owners who are living next to a frat house, basically, and who want reasonable limitations. We were stymied on every amendment that Laura and I made. And I think the public reaction is what it is.
In this case, at least Cory was saying, if I remember him correctly, was that, hey, look we have 1.9% complaint level.
No, that's not true. Maybe officially, but when you were in the community as an elected official, as I was, you would hear a hell of a lot of people complaining, grabbing you by the collar and saying, I've got this issue in my neighborhood, you need to come see this. It was a lot bigger than what the official vote tally was in the planning and zoning office. And by the way, when they would call, they would get no relief. You know, they had to be the ones monitoring the neighbor and taking photographs and getting in the faces of people, which is not a good situation.
One of the recommendations was that the owners had to be the owner's primary residence.
Yeah, I was in favor of that. In fact, I drafted that amendment, and I also gave, as part of that, the ability of an owner to rent out a guest house, which right now they can't do. And I thought it would be a good idea to give them some additional things that they could do, but they had to be on the property. They could either be in the guest house and rent out the main house, or they could be in the main house and rent out the guest house. Either way, I thought that would be appealing to people. But you had to have the owner there while the thing was going on to make sure that when the frat party arrived, they could deal with it. And it wasn't up to the neighbor to have to call the police or the zoning office that isn't even open on the weekends. It just didn't, that seemed to me to be a reasonable solution. And not to mention, my amendment would not have eliminated any of the existing ones that aren't owner operated. So practically speaking, it would have been the status quo. But that got voted down.
Yeah. And do you see the same forces at work on that kind of thing?
Well, the real estate lobby's been very strong in this, the Midshore Board of Realtors. And if you look at what all this issues with the fictitious names, it brings in this whole issue of the development interests, Jeanne Brian in particular. Jeanne Brian has been suing the county for 2 years for $10 million. And not only the county council, but the planning commission. And not only the planning commission, but the individual members of the planning commission are being sued individually, which means they have to get their own attorney. They have to pay for their own defense. And the county pays for their defense as well. But for the average planning commission member, this is not what they signed up for. They're volunteers. We've asked them to serve on this board. We believe that we have every right to rezone somebody's property, as we did as part of Next Step 190. We looked at all the villages, and we cleaned up the lines of the villages. We pushed some property outside of the village. We pulled some property into the village. We cleaned it up. We created maps. We worked really hard on that. And as part of that, Jeanne Brian sued because she didn't get what she wanted on her particular development. And she's been suing us for the last 2 years, and now it's in federal court because it's a takings claim. It's a constitutional claim, basically. This is a huge case. I believe that we had every right to do what we did. And I believe this is wealthy developers bullying the elected officials. And not only that, bullying the non-elected officials, the ones who we asked to volunteer to be on the planning commission. It is outrageous. Outrageous what she's doing. And when I heard that she was involved in the Sears-Wheeler issue, I couldn't believe it. It's inexcusable. And then what's even worse, she gave a campaign donation of $500 to Chuck Callahan, and he deposited it. There's no explanation for that. Chuck Callahan knows Jeanne Brian. They're friends. Chuck Callahan has been involved in the discussion we've had with our county attorney about this lawsuit. For him not to put two and two together and say, thank you very much for your check, but I can't accept it because we're in litigation, in case you didn't notice, that is inexcusable. And it hurts the corpus, the corporate body of the county council to have that happen. It hurts our case because she can say, hey, I gave $500 to your council person. And she can use that in the court case. It is outrageous. And then when I find she's behind the Sears-Wheeler thing, or part of it, it just shows you how little towns and counties like ours get overrun by business and development interests. And this is what we have to watch out for. And this is what we have to vote to avoid on Tuesday.
What are the good things?
I'll tell you, one happened recently. We lost a firefighter in the line of duty. And I went to his funeral. It wasn't really his funeral, but his service that they had at the Chesapeake College. And I realized standing there in the front row, next to the governor, looking right at the pallbearers and the casket and the flag-draped casket and the fire truck, and they brought him up on the fire truck. I realized just how special it was to be on the county council, to be able to go to, it was a tragic loss for the community, but to see the firefighters standing there with tears in their eyes, pallbearers at the casket, I just said, I'll never replace this. This is lucky that I could be here in this place. So you get these little things like that, the 911 celebrations that we've had, not celebrations, but commemorations, going to those events are priceless. I recommend public service to everybody I talk to. And it's hard. People don't want to go into it. It's really hard in this day and age to put your hat in the ring, and I get that. But it's very rewarding. And the things that we've done over the years to just kind of keep this a special place, I could go on forever. And those are the things I'll look back on and say, this could have been very different than it was.